Everybody. Fantastic. So we now have all members present, all 5 members present. So we have a quorum and we will begin the meeting. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to the approval for the minutes for the open and closed second on October 28th, 2021. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes? And if so, are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to approve both the open and the closed meeting minutes as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes for the open and closed session on October 28th, 2021, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Seeing no opposed, the minutes are approved. We're going to be moving to our administrator's report, of which I believe everybody has a copy of. I do want to mention again for those giving a report under the administrator section that just to please bring up the highlights. I believe we're going to have a pretty lengthy meeting today, especially. So just bring up any highlights that there are that you have on your report, and we will start now. Who would like to begin?
Good afternoon, Nikki Charleston. I'll get started. So we are welcoming several new people, and we said a sad goodbye to one. So introducing Marianne, Arthur, and Maria in the administrator's report, and saying farewell to Susan and thank her for all of her important IT database work that she's done for us for almost 5 years. So over the next several meetings, I'm sure you will be seeing some new faces, and we are eager to have them, and we'll miss Susan. I guess I just would like to bring to your attention the special election for Prince George's County. There's a vacancy in a county council seat. It's District 8 there. And I'll just highlight that it really has it's a lot of resources for us to support the Prince George's County Board of Elections in this election. It's a vote by mail election with in-person voting. And certainly the yeoman's work is at the local Board of Elections, but it has required that we shift some resources and reprioritize things to support this election. There's more information about it in your administrator's report. I just wanted to call that out as something that many of us here are supporting, giving significant amount of times to do. So with that, I'll refer you to the administrator's report under election reform and management. Jen just referred to the report. I know Melissa's going to be the star of the show today with early voting centers. And with that, I will turn it over to Mary for any highlights of her section.
Thank you, Nikki. Good afternoon, everybody. Mary Kramer Wagner. Just one thing to report. We had our last deployment of MD voters the weekend of December 3rd. It was an important release. It finalized the requirements for permanent absentee ballot list and MVA's new driver license system configurations. And that is all I have.
Well, thanks, Mary. And for me, I'll just refer to the report there. Just that for the Prince George's special election, their first report, their first campaign finance report is due December 27th. And we received a ton of enforcement actions to close out accounts. So if you have any questions about any of those enforcement actions, I'd be happy to answer them. But if with that, I'll just refer to my written work there, and that's it.
Great, thank you. Who's next?
And that's actually the end of the administrator's report.
Okay. Fantastic. Are there any?
Yeah, it's a lot of special election support that you're not seeing, but it's all hands on deck.
Yeah, I completely understand. I know how much work an election is, and to throw another election in the middle of everything for both the county and the state board is a challenge. And I thank you for all the thank all the staff for the work that's put into that. I know that that is not easy, especially this time of year. So thank you. Are there any other board members with questions or comments on the administrator's report? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to, I believe, the proposed changes to Comar, item number 6 on the agenda.
Did you want the Assistant Attorney General report?
Oh, yeah, I guess we do need that. I checked them off. Sorry about that. And
It's
you
okay,
were,
Mr.
you
Chairman.
were here early. Mr. Cecil. I apologize sincerely. Thank you.
That's quite all right. It's a short update this week. So a couple cases came off the list. We are mercifully light as we head into the election season, where no doubt things will get busy again litigation wise. But in the meantime, we have updates in all 3 of the matters that are on your list. The Fusaro matter that was in the 4th Circuit. We had arguments on the 4th Circuit appeal by Mr. Fusaro in September. The 4th Circuit has issued an opinion in the case affirming the summary judgment that the defendants had won in the trial court. Mr. Fusaro is in the process, or has filed a petition for en banc review by the 4th Circuit. What that means is he's asked the entire bench of active judges to consider that ruling and potentially rehear the case. There are procedures in place for the court to ask for a response from the other party. In such circumstances, we have not been asked yet by the 4th Circuit for a response to that petition, but the court hasn't yet ruled on it. The next matter is the WinRed case. Since we met last, we had argument on November 2nd, 2021 on the motions that were before the court. There was a motion for a preliminary injunction against enforcement of some enforcement subpoenas issued by the state defendants, as well as argument on our motion to dismiss. The court has not yet ruled on either of those motions. And finally, the third matter, I'm not going to refer to the full case caption. This is the case that was brought by an individual who believes that the availability of voter lists for a fee to members of the public violates a slew of state and federal laws. Since we met last, a couple things have happened. One, we moved to dismiss the complaint, but perhaps more pertinently for our purposes, the plaintiff moved for a preliminary injunction seeking to enjoin the Board of Elections from referring to even the name of the plaintiff in the caption of the case during public meetings. That motion is pending. That preliminary injunction motion is scheduled for hearing on January 5th, I believe. And our motion to dismiss is scheduled for hearing on February 14th. As a courtesy and given the relief sought, I am not disclosing the name of the plaintiff in the caption of the complaint, even though it is a matter of public record. Given that the court may rule in that motion, may order the Board of Elections to ultimately to remove references. So currently that's how we're treating this. I mentioned the argument dates, and other than those matters, there are no further updates to present to the board.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your report. Are there any questions any board member has for the Assistant Attorney General?
Mr. Chairman, I have just a couple of questions.
Sure.
Thank you, Andrea. The January 5th hearing, do you have an assigned judge for that in Anne Arundel County?
I don't believe so. I have to check. I know that, I don't have the order in front of me. I know I've seen judges issue orders to the clerk to schedule dates for hearing, but I don't believe that necessarily means that those judges are the ones that are to hear those cases. So I don't want to get ahead of myself and say that those are the judges that issued those orders.
Okay. And can you disclose in this forum why the plaintiff has asked for anonymity?
Yes, I can. The plaintiff has asked for anonymity because she is concerned, given the nature of her complaint, she is concerned that there may be interests or individuals or entities who stand to be harmed by the relief that she is seeking in the case. If you recall, she is seeking to prevent the state from making public, making available lists of voters and registration information. And she contends that there are people who benefit from that and indeed profit from the availability of that information, and that she could be harmed by people who would be impacted negatively by a ruling in her favor in the case. And so she does not want to have her name be publicly available so that she would be not endangered by those interests.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from any board members? Seeing none, now we move on to approval of proposed changes to COMA.
Well, thank you. So in front of you are a couple of changes. The memo, Mr. Chair, how do you want me to go through it? Do you want me to go through them all together and then answer questions, or do you want me to go through one section at a time and then take a vote? Just
Are they substantially similar?
no. I mean, they're all campaign finance. So
Yeah, but they're not dealing with the same subject matter.
right.
I believe what we should do is go through them one at a time, deal with that, take a vote on that, move to the next one. So we can
Sure.
move expeditiously.
Okay, so the first one will be 33130702, which is the authority line requirements in electronic media. These proposed regulations are going to modify the authority line requirements for political committees and for entities that have to file campaign finance or disclosure reports for the use of deep fake videos and audio recordings, and additionally sending text messages by political committees. First, the proposed regulations define what a deep fake audio and video recording is, and then it modifies the authority line requirements to include an additional disclaimer at the beginning, at the end, beginning at the end, and the end of the recording that it did not occur in reality. I'm not sure if you're aware of what deep fake videos are, but they are a new form of technology out there that is very lifelike and very real, and has that old adage that seeing is believing is no longer true when you start watching these deep fake videos. And it is a disturbing trend in the social media aspect here that is going to occur. And it's very easy to create deep fakes and to pass them off as real, I would say, videos. And so this is just to help the voters out there to make sure that they understand that we're not saying that you cannot make a deep fake video, but they just have to have that additional disclaimer as a part of the authority line requirements. Additionally, the proposed regulations require political committees that disseminate text messages to individuals, but the text message service says limits the number of characters or doesn't allow for the authority line in the original message to immediately follow that text message with an additional text message to include the authority line so that individuals get it. This, of course, is a very cheap and effective method for communicating with voters. Campaigns are using this, and they're sometimes running up or butting up against text character limits. So this is allowing them to still use the service and comply with authority line requirements. If they can embed it in the original message, then that's fine. But this is just giving them an avenue for to use this technology as well. So this is one, again, these are just two regulations on authority line requirements to allow for new technology to be used by campaigns and independent expenditure entities.
Are there any questions from the board on these, narrowly these two issues in 33.13.07 and .14 having to do with authority line? Oh, no, just .07 we're doing right now.
Right.
So just dealing with authority line requirements on the deepfake videos and the text messages.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, so Jared, did this come up, I guess, organically, or just like you was trying to stay ahead and do best practices, or was there
More
motivation?
best practices. You know, in the past, I've always tried to keep ahead of the curve on these things here. I've done a little bit more research into the deepfake. 60 Minutes just did an excellent piece on deepfake videos and how it was, how its impact was being felt in some of the other elections in other states, but it has not luckily come to the shores of Maryland, but doesn't necessarily mean that it will not. So this kind of is preemptive, and in that regards, it's a proactive type of regulation.
And so all your, you know, you're not saying that a campaign can't use this type of video. You're saying they have to put an authority line on.
Right, exactly. And it's just an additional disclaimer, just saying this did not occur in reality, kind of just allowing the voter to be aware that whatever this person is saying, that they themselves did it through some sort of computer software.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Any other questions from the board?
I guess, well, this is still preliminary too. I'm wondering, in other instances where we mandate some sort of language in campaign literature, do we leave it vague, or do we have a specific, I don't know, like phrasing we would require here? Like, so for here, as proposed, where we say, a clear, conspicuous manner, there has to be something that says to the effect of what's being presented does not reflect a true recording. But I'm wondering if it's precedent or if it's good or bad. I don't have an opinion either way of if we should be more specific.
Well, I think that one of the things is that since these are draft and they will go out as proposed, we can listen to see what some of the comments are on back on that. Additionally, I just wanted to make sure that if I drafted any sort of long terms, how that would come about on the medium itself. So I've allowed a little bit of flexibility just for this purpose here, whether it was like done in parody, you know, it allows all the gambit for the political committees, but we can, I would say, address that if this becomes a significant issue with, I would say, if the deepfake videos came and we had a lot of inconsistencies to see what language would be consistent if needed.
I have a quick question. The idea of you're defining deepfake audio or video recording that appears to constitute a true recording of an action, a sound, a vocalization, or an image. What would that do with parody?
Well, I mean, that basically it could make me, you know, say something that I never really said. And they could, you know, that this was, you know, not a true recording. It was done in parody. But we're allowing, I guess, the political committees to kind of just come up with their own little disclaimer as to that this is not a true recording.
You know, Mr. Develop, I think it's important to note too in the definition that an audio video, it requires the audio or video recording to appear to constitute a true recording. If someone wanted to make a cartoon of, you know, insert a politician's name, saying something outlandish as a parody or as a sort of mischaracterization or a gross exaggeration of what that candidate stands for, that wouldn't fit within this definition. That wouldn't be regulated by it.
I'm sorry, yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much for that. That clears up my only issue with that. Thank you. Anyone else? I don't want to cut that short. If no one else has any other comments, are we prepared to vote on 33-13-07? Is there a motion to accept it as presented?
I'll make the motion, Mr. Chairman.
So there's a motion to accept it. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion 33-13-0702, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
I don't think anyone's opposed, so it passes unanimously.
Thank you.
So you're moving on to .13.14, is that correct?
Correct. This is public financing at the county level. So one of the issues now that has been facing both Howard and Montgomery County, and also other ones that are proposing, is the use of central committees to make coordinated in-kind contributions to county public finance candidates. While this really wasn't a big issue in 4 years ago in Montgomery County, it was an issue, and these proposed regs kind of help set guidelines for it. So these set limits for the coordinated in-kind contributions and restricts the source of funding to be consistent with the enabling legislation in the county programs. So it's basically saying that the central committees are allowed to make these expenditures on behalf of publicly financed candidates. However, if they do this, it's limited to a certain dollar amount, and additionally that it has to come from permissible sources, whatever the county sets for those permissible sources, so that county candidates can't use the central committees as end arounds or to, I would say, increase their coffers through coordinated in-kind contributions. So it's a narrow exception, and both I think the counties are aware of these rules and have not really lodged any objections to it. So with that, I propose that they would be adopted.
Does any board member have questions? And this though, if I may, that is just .07. Are we just dealing with that now, or are you dealing with?
This is .14, public financing.
Oh, you also have some information there in electronic signatures and transfers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, right. I forgot about that in my memo. Yes. So one of the other parts about this is that it includes electronic signatures in there, and so yeah, I'm sorry. That was 07. 08 is the electronic transfers and electronic signatures. The signatures here are basically each program has allowed for electronic signatures to occur on contribution cards or receipts that they require the candidate to receive back from the donor. So this basically sets out how the how the electronic signature can proceed. And then transfers, I'm sorry, I forgot to put that in here. Transfers are that you cannot, the state law prohibits a publicly financed candidate to transfer its funds to any other political committee, but the purchase of a voter file access service from the state central committee is not considered a transfer and is a permissible expenditure, because that is a service that the state central committee provides to all campaigns across the board, and it's considered their van, and campaigns need to have access to that service. It is not it doesn't go to anything for political purposes, that purchase. It stays outside the realm. So,
Okay.
so that's it.
Anyone have questions about any of the three items under .14, which is the coordinated in-kind contributions, electronic signatures, and transfers? Any board
Question.
member? Yes.
This is probably driven by my inexperience. Are there other areas, Jared, I guess, where, or how do we track in-kind contributions? Like, I guess, is there going to be a risk of, I don't know, some fuzzy math occurring that we need to, like, you would decide or litigate on or make a determination on?
So all in-kind contributions have to be reported, and both in this case here, even with central committees, coordinated ones as well. So both the central committee would have to say that it's a coordinated in-kind contribution on their campaign finance report, and then the receiving committee as well. As to your fuzzy math part there, let me just say this. Fair market value is always a matter of, I would say, debate between political parties. And, one's going to say that service is valued at way much more than it really is, and the other one will try to keep it as low as possible. As long as it's justifiable in that regard there, and it's in the bounds of reasonableness, that's where we come in and just kind of say that service is, you had to have some sort of justification behind that. And so we try to limit the fuzzy math as much as possible. Additionally, with the low limits of $10,000, it's really tough to, it's not going to be used for, I would say, a lot of political advertisements. What this is designed to do is to allow publicly financed candidates to appear on literature provided by the state central committee and the local central committees, on their lists, their flyers, just things that are candidate forums that they themselves are kind of providing without necessarily running afoul of in-kind contributions or impermissible contributions. So this is kind of allowing them to exist and function without necessarily being over, without it being I would say, an avenue to circumvent the program's intent.
That makes sense. I guess I was thinking too, and I don't know where I haven't tracked it as someone who doesn't reach the maximum at all in my donations, is has it been, could it be litigated generally? Because I would imagine if normally just reporting that there was an in-kind contribution, maybe it hadn't been an issue, but here where if it is such a low level threshold where someone could make the claim about their opponent that, hey, you've received $10,000 worth of in-kind contribution, but maybe it's not a real practical issue.
Right. I think that 10,000 is such a low threshold. It's not, you're not going to get a lot out of that. I mean, you're going to get little things that, normally with workers or volunteers that are distributing literature, all that little stuff can add up, but they won't be able to run a major, I would say, operation out of the state central committee or the local central committee to basically say, I'm a public finance candidate, but at the same time, you have unlimited resources through that.
Any other questions? How many public financed candidates do you think, or how many counties have that option?
Right now, 2, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, well, Prince George's County's passed it and it will be available in 4 years from now. Baltimore County is in the process of passing its legislation to be available in 4 years from now. And Baltimore City has also is in the process of it as well. So it is spreading across the counties.
And like Baltimore County's law that they have right now, how many dollars do they give a candidate for different kind of races? How does that work?
I believe that is up to $800,000 per now. So Montgomery gives, I think, 1.5 million for the county exec race total. Let's see. So Baltimore County. So they're giving $750,000 for the county exec. So they're giving a total of 1.5 million for the county exec race for both 750,000 for the primary, 750,000 for the general, and 80,000 for a candidate for county council in each election.
Who does that? Montgomery, you said?
No, that's Baltimore County.
Baltimore County.
Montgomery's programs are here. So they, I believe, give 750,000 for
I mean, I think to your point.
yes, they give 750. Sorry, they give 750,000 for county exec for each election, $250,000 for councilman or a council member at large, and 125,000 for a district council member per election.
So $10,000 is a pretty low threshold. So I'm wondering if it even would include, I mean, a lot of central committees will do a voter guide, and they might do 2 or 3 that they mail out, and they would do that countywide. And that voter guide may have, vote for this person for county executive and these people for your county council by district, bam, 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 and this guy for your state's attorney. And, what are you going to do to determine that? Are you going to take the total cost of that mailing and divide by the candidates? But some candidates are only by district. It gets very complicated.
I mean, well, that's the whole thing, is that, right, in that situation, that would be, the in-kind portion of it would be divided, attributed equally among all the candidates that benefited from that. So so that's why 10,000 is perfect, because even if they're mentioned like once or they're in their flyer there, it's not going to rise to the level of a major expense or in-kind contribution for that candidate. So.
And what about, you also alluded, and correct, I could have heard this wrong, so I'm sorry if I understood it wrong. But like if a central committee put together door knocking and stuff like that, those services would be considered in kind?
If they're paid, if those individuals were paid.
But if they're volunteer, it would not.
Right. Right, exactly.
Okay. Now, and this also would not affect counties where there is no public financing. It would only be where they're accepting public money. Is that correct?
And only for even in the counties that have public financing, this is only for publicly financed candidates that voluntarily accepted into the program for it.
what do you do about the PACs that form and then do mailings on behalf of candidates?
As long as it's not coordinated, then that's perfectly legal and they can do that. They can do that for a publicly financed candidate. They can do that for a non-publicly financed candidate. Independent expenditures are not applicable to this situation.
Thank you. Any other questions that any board member has based on 33.13.14, 7, 8, and 9? So would there be a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we move on to 33.18.02.
Okay. So that one is easy. That's basically, it's just saying that if a person outside of this is trying to attempt to influence a voter's decision to go to the polls by creating a deep fake video that they need within 90 days of an election, that they need to just put the same disclaimer requirements that a political committee needs to do in that time period. Because a deep fake video during that period there could be considered an act, a fraudulent act to to influence a voter's decisions to going to the polls. So by doing this little disclaimer here, this would alleviate that fraudulent act's intent.
Okay. Are there any questions on 33.18.02?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question.
Yes.
I'm trying to, from the text of this, trying to figure out what it is we're preventing. Is this designed to catch the, there's no election on Tuesday, or your polling place is moved, or what behavior is this designed to prevent or to require disclosure?
Right. That would be correct, with the idea that it would create, if I had a deep fake video, which would be, someone that would of authority that would appear in reality, say something like, no, the polls are officially closed. Now that would basically, by doing that, by distributing that within 90 days before an election without meeting those same requirements, would be, basically, and it also has a willful and knowingly influencing attempt. So this is not something where they posted anything without any sort of forethought. So this is to make sure that if you are trying to attempt and knowingly and willfully trying to publish a deepfake video to influence a person's decision to go to the polls or to cast a vote with, in this case, in your case, false information, then, they would have to meet the same requirements.
Like if they did it with the assistance of computer software, right?
Yes, right.
So if I just came up with a robocall and said, hey, your polling place is closed, no disclosure?
No, they still have to have disclosure, but this is just kind of, that's a different type of deal. We've had those robocalls before as well, but this is just kind of the same thing with a robocall, is that they have to have an authority line and everything. So this is just keeping consistent with that.
Okay, thank you.
And this would not then, in your opinion, or in Mr. Trento's opinion, I mean, I'm just envisioning somebody making a video because that's what they like doing and popping it on their Facebook. And, you know, it goes viral because they made it a parody. Is that what would be covered here and not? Are they then subject to some kind of disclaimer law, even though they're not a PAC, they're just an individual who's trying to make a joke?
That's still fine because they're not, it's a parody. It's easily distinguished. It's not something that is authentic recording and trying to pass itself off as an authentic recording.
I'm sticky about stuff like that. And you can tell in the last couple,
Yes.
and partly because I read things like The Onion and the Babylon Bee all the time. I like to laugh. And
Right.
amazing how many mainstream media people have sued and gone after people like The Onion and the Babylon Bee, acting like that they're real news when in fact they're parody because they look like, you know, although if you read them, you have to be pretty moronic to think that they're real. But still, you know, you don't want to stop expression, right? You don't want
Right.
to, you know, we don't want to become a police state. That's the reason for my questions. So,
Yes, that's not a problem.
any other questions?
I'm trying to pull up the rest of Comar on my computer. What is there a penalty section or for violating this prohibition?
Right, that would be a part of part of those penalties that are laid out in Title 16 of the election law article.
Do you happen to know? Is it? I'm assuming a misdemeanor or something.
Yes.
Any other questions? Seeing none, is there a motion to accept as presented 33.18.02 prohibited acts?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those, let's try this different so that everybody, all those in agreement in 33.18.02 as presented, just raise your hand because I think it's easier to see. Okay, so all there's none opposed, so it passes unanimously. We're to last one, I think, is 33.20.08.
Yes, this is just basically, it's just changing the late fee penalties to match the late fee structure for political committees. So the General Assembly in 2019 had already changed the penalties for political committees to the maximum of $1,000. So the law governing contribution disclosure statements for persons doing public businesses, and also the if you employ a lobbyist and make contributions, their penalties by law have to be identical to political committees. So this is just getting the regulations to match the law, basically. So this is just moving this up to you know, in the same manner. So instead of us constantly going back and forth with that it's $10 a day or whatever the penalty is and updating the regs, we just basically said in the regs here, it's always going to be the same method and manner prescribed for political committees, and the maximum fee now is $1,000, which is statutory. So this is just a straight out statutory change.
Okay. Any questions from anyone on the board? 33.20.08 on sanctions. The chair would entertain a motion to approve and accept 33.20.08 as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second? Need a second?
Second.
And seconded, and all those in favor signify by raising your hand so that we can see. Great, passes unanimously.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, Thank you very much. And I believe that concludes your part of your part of this part.
Yes, right, exactly, because right.
So now I think we move on to number 7, and I believe Ms. Charleston is going to be working on that. Is that correct?
That's right. Thank you very much. So before you have a memo from me dated November 16th, which provides some background information on proposed regulations that are now before you for final adoption. They were published in the Maryland Register, and we received no public comments. So the 4 regulations, well, 5 before you, 4 of which relate to incorporating ballot drop-off boxes into our existing regulatory structure. 1 is defining it. The 2nd and 3rd bring in when they're timely or allow that certain forms be submitted there, and then defining what timely is. And then the last provision is about election workers during early voting and what kind of support is required by the local boards. It changes it so that the local boards have to provide on-site support on certain days of early voting, but they are then permitted to provide remote support on other days. So we moved to remote support during 2020 and it worked out well. So wanted to provide some flexibility to the local boards on how they support their poll workers during opening and closing of the early voting centers. So those 5 changes are before you for final adoption. Again, no public comments received. Mayo, the Maryland Association of Election Officials, had reviewed them before we brought them to you as proposed regs and provided comments that we'd incorporated. So I'm happy to answer any questions about them and ask for your approval for final adoption.
Anyone on the board have any questions? These have already been through the board one time with a series of questions and went out for public comment. They've come back for final adoption without comment from the public. So just wondering if any board member has any additional questions at this time. Seeing none, the chair would, and I think we can do these en masse, would entertain a motion to accept for final adoption the 5 presented 33.01.01.01b, 33.05.04.02c, 33.11.02.01d, 33.11.03.08b3, and 33.17.05.01c. Does anyone like to make the motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the final adoption of these 5 regulations signify by raising your hand. Great. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we move on to approval of confidentiality requests.
Yes. This will wrap up for me here. So in front of you is a request for 5 individuals for confidentiality. They are all sitting judges and in their respective counties on the form there for you. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but they've all been verified that they are sitting judges.
Any questions from any board member? And everyone here, I think, on this call is an attorney but me, so probably no. So their chair will entertain a motion to approve the 5 confidentiality requests.
I'll make the motion, Mr. Chairman.
There a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we are now going to move to the approval of early voting centers. And let me say that we have, let me just set the stage here, that we will do these for the most part alphabetically. We are going to move Wicomico before Washington County. We're going to do Washington County at the end because we have two outside presenters who will be presenting on Washington County, and we want to allow the other counties that have already gone to be able to not have to go through that testimony and everything as well if they choose to go. So we're gonna go right through the list, and then we're gonna do Wicomico before Washington, and then we'll do Washington County. At that time, we do have two people from Washington County to present that are citizens, in addition to the, I believe we're going to start with the normal presentation, then we're going to have the LBE present, and then we're going to have the two speakers speak. And when we get to the speaker part, I'll explain that, but you know, we're going to try to keep the comments down to about 3 to 4 minutes for those that are going to be the public. And then, of course, whatever questions the board would have for them. So who's doing this? Who's running this part?
I am Melissa. Thank you for the introduction, Bill. You covered most of what I was going to cover. The only thing that I will add is that we're only presenting the counties who have new or changes to their existing early voting centers. Bear with me, I've not ever shared my screen here before. So I'm just trying to pick the right way to do it. Did that work?
Yes.
Oh, great. Let me just turn it to screen. Okay, great. All right, so I will just work my way down the alphabet, if that's okay with you. We don't have any new early voting centers for Allegheny, and Anne Arundel will be presented in January. They are still finalizing some centers. So I will start with Baltimore City. And for each county, city, I will do just a brief overview of the totality of the centers and then move into the specifics of the new centers that are being presented. So some background information. Baltimore City will have 7 total early voting centers. The new center is University of Maryland at Baltimore. It's the Student Engagement or Community Engagement Center. They will have the same centers as previous years, but this particular center has just slightly moved a bit, so it's being represented. 100% of the voters live within 5 miles of an early voting center, as proposed in Baltimore City. And the early voting centers serve areas with below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. So with regard to the specific center, the community engagement center is actually just moving 300 feet down the street. It is accessible and allows for electioneering. It's accessible by public transportation. There is limited parking at the location, but the LBE has arranged to get additional parking in lots nearby, and it is adequate to handle estimated peak voting hours. So this is the location of the new center. And then that would be the layout in the new center. And then our recommendation is to approve it. Obviously, as we kind of go through, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I should have mentioned we also have the election directors from each of the city or counties and the city here to answer any additional questions you might have.
Does any board member have any questions on Baltimore City's additional center or change to their center? So I think probably what the best way to do this is, as we are on each one, if there are no questions or once questions are resolved, we would take a vote whether to approve or not approve each center, so, or each county. So is there a motion to approve the selection by Baltimore City for the early voting site?
So moved.
Or
Second.
All those, are there any opposed? Seeing none opposed, it passes unanimously.
Okay, then I will move right along to the overview of Calvert. So Calvert's going to have 3 early voting centers. They're going to have 2 new centers. One is the Southern Community Center, and one is a building behind the Fairview Library. Calvert's required to have 2 centers, but they have chosen to have 3. As I mentioned, they'll add 2. One will be in or the existing is in Prince Frederick. One of the new centers will be in Lusby, and the other will be in Owings. And 100% of the voters live within 10 miles of one of their early voting centers. The early voting centers are positioned so that they serve areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. This is just a map of where the 3 centers will be in the county. And moving forward, each county will have a similar set of maps. This is the voter density map. So each location is mapped, and then the density of the voters is mapped by precinct. And the text box shows exactly how many voters live within, in this case, a 10-mile radius of each of the early voting centers. This is a map that reflects the diverse population, again, by precinct in the county, and shows how these centers serve those areas. And then this is voter turnout. So as the previous maps have demonstrated, this one just demonstrates where people are and aren't voting. And again, these maps are positioned to serve areas where people are not historically voting at an average or above average level. So starting with a detailed look at the Southern Community Center, it is accessible and allows for electioneering. It's accessible to public transportation and has adequate parking. It is adequate to handle peak voting hours. Oops, sorry, my screen just did something. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I can't for some reason. Bear with me, I apologize. Okay, well, it's kind of. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. And here are the photos. I'm sorry to jump around. There you go. This is the actual center. This is the indoor map of what it will look like on voting day. And then the recommendation to approve. Did you want me to go through the second one first, or would you prefer to address this?
I don't see controversy. This looks like a great distribution. So maybe go through the second one and we'll do one vote to approve them both from Calvert County.
Sounds good. The second location will be, it is actually a to-be-built location behind the Fairview Library. The center is going to be a modular trailer that will be placed in the parking lot of the library for the 2022 election while the permanent building is being constructed. The permanent building will be available for 2024 and thereafter. It's accessible for the 2022 voting. The trailer will be made accessible with a ramp, an ADA compliant ramp. It allows for electioneering, is accessible to public transportation, has adequate parking. It is adequate to handle estimated peak voting hours, and again, serves areas with below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. Go ahead.
The permanent building, is it a new library or is it just a community center? What is the permanent building that's going?
It is not a new library. It's going to be a new building in the back of the library. And I could probably get Gail to speak to the details of what that building will be.
Well, I'm just wondering if that's a permanent, is that looking at a permanent solution? So we would have another change then from the temporary to the permanent solution. And
right, exactly. So 2024, I would then present the permanent building to you.
Great. Any board members have any questions for the two centers in Calvert County? Both the Fairview Library and what was the other one's called? The Southern Community Center. Seeing no questions, entertain a motion to approve the two centers for Calvert County.
So moved.
So moved.
So we have a
Second.
move and a second there. And then anyone opposed to the Fairview Library and the Southern Community Center for Calvert County? Seeing no opposition, passes unanimously.
Okay. So Caroline will be keeping their existing early voting center, so we'll move to Carroll. They will have 3 total early voting centers, one at North Carroll Senior Center, one at, and that is the new location. They will have an existing early voting center at the Westminster Senior Center. And then they're going to change their existing early voting center, which was at South Carroll Swim Club, to the South Carroll Senior Center. In this instance, 60.5% of voters live within a 5-mile radius of an early voting centers. The centers serve areas of dense population, and there was no way to configure the centers to relocate them to meet the 80% consideration. The early voting centers serve areas with below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. I'm going to scroll through the maps. So this is a clean map of where the 3 will be located. That is the voter density map. This is just a little bit more of a detailed view of the voter density. We had this made to try to look to see if there was a way to reposition these to hit 80% of registered voters, and there was not. This is the minority population, and then the voter turnout map. So the first new center is the North Carroll Senior Center. This is the additional early voting center. It is accessible and allows for electioneering, adequate parking, and adequate to handle peak voting hours. It serves an area of low voter turnout and dense population. This is the front of the center. And the layout. And then I'll move to the change. This is South Carroll Senior Center. It's replacing the South Carroll Swim Club. It is accessible for 2022 early voting, allows for electioneering, has adequate parking, and is adequate to handle estimated peak voting hours. And it serves areas of dense population, low voter turnout, and above average diverse population. Front.
So we have any questions on either of the 2 locations, one change and one addition for Carroll County? Seeing no questions, the chair will entertain a motion to accept the one change and the one new location for Carroll County.
So moved.
It's moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any opposition to the one change and the other new location in Carroll County? Seeing none, it passes unanimously.
Moving on to Cecil County, they will have 2 early voting centers, and their new early voting center is going to be at Cecil Arena. They're adding an additional, they have only had one in the past. 89.4% of their voters live within 10 miles of an early voting center, and the early voting centers serve areas with below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. Map of where they will be. And again, their voter density, their minority population, and then their voter turnout. So with regard to this particular center, it's an additional voting center. It is accessible and allows for electioneering. There's adequate parking, and it is adequate to handle estimated peak voting hours. This is a photo of the arena and the indoor on voting day. And that is Cecil.
Are there any questions for Cecil County? There's just one here. It's just the Cecil Arena that's being added. So we entertain a motion to approve the Cecil Arena as an early voting site in Cecil County.
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second? Well, we had two motions, so treat one of them as a second, please. And we will say anyone that is opposed to the Cecil Arena, seeing no opposition, then we are unanimous.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to Charles County. They are going to have one new additional early voting center. I'm sorry, they're going to have a total of 3. They will have one new early voting center, which is St. Joseph Church Hall. And they're going to change their existing center from Glen Eagles Community Center to Waldorf JC's. These centers will ensure that 76.7% of the registered voters live within 5 miles of an early voting center. And the early voting centers do serve areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse citizens. That's their voter density, their diversity, and then their voter turnout. So starting with the Waldorf JCs, it's replacing Glen Eagles Community Center. It's accessible and allows for electioneering. It is accessible by public transportation and has adequate parking, is able to handle estimated peak voting hours. It serves areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. And the center is a bit more centrally located in Waldorf and serves roughly 8,500 more voters than the previous center did. This is the front of the Waldorf JCs. And that will be the layout. Then I can move to St. Joseph Church Hall. This is the additional early voting center for a total of 3. It's accessible for 2022 early voting, allows for electioneering, is accessible by public transportation, has adequate parking, and can handle estimated peak voting hours. And it does serve an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. That is the front of the building and the inside. And that wraps up Charles.
Okay, are there any questions from any board members? So we have the St. Joseph's Church Hall and the Waldorf JCs.
Move to approve.
So there's a motion. Is there a second? A second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to the St. Joseph's Church Hall and Waldorf JCs for Charles County? Seeing none, approved unanimously.
Okay. So Frederick County is going to have 4 early voting centers, and they are going back to the centers that they used in 2018. There are no new early voting centers. They're required to have 3, but they've elected to have 4. They serve 66% of the registered voters within 5 miles of an early voting center. And this is another situation where there was no way to relocate the 4 centers such that they could meet the voter density consideration. The early voting center serves areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. And this, I just have the maps for, since there is no actual new building to approve, just the locations.
Okay. Let's see. Because the extra early voting center is in conjunction with the state board and the local government, maybe this is a good question for Andrea. Do we need to take a vote on this to show our affirmation for the fourth site? Mr. Trento?
I'm here. I'm just looking at the statute again. I'm pulling it up, sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Just give me a minute. So the language changed this year. As you may know, the statute now reads, in addition to the early voting centers required in this subsection, each county may establish one additional early voting center if first, the local board and the governing body of the county agree to establish an additional early voting center, and then the state board approves the establishment of the additional early voting center. There is express language that makes it sequential and seems to require that the sequence of events take place first at the local level and then followed by state board action. So
Okay.
that would be my advice.
Okay, so since we have already approved this location in the past, I think what we'd be looking for is an affirmative vote from the state board for the fourth location that has already been approved. Would that be appropriate?
I believe so.
Okay, so is there a motion in that vein?
So moved.
So moved.
All right, we had two motions there. Treat one as a second. And is there any opposition to four early voting sites in Frederick County? Seeing no opposition, it passes unanimously.
Right. I'll move on to Garrett County. They're going to have two early voting centers. Their new location will be the Grantsville Volunteer Fire Department. This center will replace the Northern Outreach Center, which was approximately 3 miles away. Garrett County is required to have one early voting center, but has chosen to have two. And 75.4% of all registered voters are within 100 miles of an early, or I'm sorry, 10 miles of an early voting center. The early voting centers serve areas with below average voter turnout. This is the voter density map, the minority population map, and the voter turnout map. With regard to the Grantsville Fire Department, it is a change to an early voting center. It is accessible. It's a brand new building. It allows for electioneering and has adequate parking and can handle estimated peak voting hours. And the center serves areas of lower than average voter turnout. This is a photo of the fire department. And then the floor plan. And that wraps up Garrett County.
Are there any questions about Garrett County?
Move to approve.
You have a motion.
Second.
And a second. Is there any opposition to the extra early voting site at Grantsville Volunteer Fire Department in Garrett County? Seeing none, it is approved unanimously.
And Harvard will be keeping their same sites, so I'm gonna move on to Howard County that will have five.
They don't have an extra, is that right?
So Harvard.
Just you can look to see if any of the other ones we've done that I just want to make sure that we have the proper documentation for the extra early voting site for whoever needs it, so that even if they're using a previous facility, that we've acknowledged that they're having the extra site.
Okay. They're required to have 4 and are having 4 Harvard, and I will go back and make sure that the other counties are doing the same, and if there's an exception, I'll bring it in January with Anne Arundel.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Howard County, they're gonna have 5 voting centers. They have 3 new locations. The county is changing the locations so that they're more evenly spread out throughout the county. With this disbursement, they reach 92% of their registered voters within 5 miles of an early voting center. And they serve areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. This is the map of the centers. The voter density. The minority population, and the voter turnout. The first change is to St. John Baptist Church. It is accessible for 2022 early voting and allows for electioneering. It's accessible by public transportation and has adequate parking and can handle estimated peak voting hours. This is also in an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. This is a photo of the building and the interior map. Oops, sorry about that. And then our recommendation. If you guys don't have questions about that, I'll go through the other 2 also. North Laurel is again a change. It's accessible for 2022 and allows for electioneering. Has public transportation, adequate parking, and can handle estimated peak voting hours, again in an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. Final is the Gary J. Arthur Center. It's a change and is accessible for 2022 early voting, allows for electioneering, accessible by public transportation and has adequate parking and can handle estimated peak voting hours. Photo of the building. And then the gym where they will do early voting. And that is the 3 new for Howard.
Are there any questions for Howard County on the three centers that are changes that we need to vote on? I believe they are the St. John the Baptist, North Laurel Community Center, and the Gary J. Arthur Center. Is that correct? Are there any questions on this? Seeing none, the motion to approve the 3?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
To approve all.
Okay.
So is there any opposition to the 3, the St. John the Baptist, the North Laurel Community Center, and the Gary J. Arthur Center in Howard County? Is there any opposition? Seeing none, it is unanimous.
Okay, and Kent County is keeping their same center, so we'll move to Montgomery. Montgomery is going to have a total of 14 early voting centers. They'll have 3 new centers that will be added and 1 change to a center. They'll be using a social hall at the Wheaton Library for early voting and then the gym for election day. They've previously used the gym only. The county is required to have 13 early voting centers and has opted to have an additional early voting center. The Ballot Drive Community Rec Center is the first one that I'll present, and that is the additional early voting center. 98% of their registered voters will live within 5 miles of an early voting center, and the centers serve areas with below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. It's a map of the centers, and these maps do include the Ballot location. It's kind of right in the middle. So Ballot Drive Community Rec Center is there an additional early voting center. It is accessible and allows for electioneering. It's accessible by public transportation and has adequate parking, adequate to handle estimated peak voting hours. It has not yet been approved by the county council. It has been approved by their board.
Wait a minute, stop right there.
Yep.
This the center number 14?
Yes, EV 14.
So I believe what I heard Mr. Trento just say is that there is a step that needs to come before our vote. Am I incorrect in that assessment of what your opinion was, Mr. Trento?
The law does expressly state that first, pull it up again. Here it is. In addition to the early voting centers required by the statute, each county may establish one additional early voting center if first, the local board and the governing body of the county agree to establish an additional early voting center, and then the state board approves the establishment of the additional early voting center. I don't think there's anything stopping the board today from, giving Montgomery County the sense of the board that it would approve this pending satisfaction of that first step. But I do think there would have to be a formal approval by this board after that first step takes place.
Okay. So what I'd like to do then is handle this separately from the changes.
Sure.
So on just early voting site in Montgomery County number 14, Ballard Drive, we can't take a vote to approve because we don't have something we can't approve yet. Is there any questions about early vote site number 14 in Montgomery County? Is there any opposition to a 14th site or this particular site as the 14th site? What we can convey to Montgomery County is that there's no opposition. The board would be inclined to completely agree, but we need the county to first agree with the LBE, and then we could then formally approve it in January.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move to the changes in Montgomery County.
Sure. White Oak Recreation Center is the next early voting center. The gym will be used for the primary and the social hall will be used for the general. It's an additional early voting center. It is accessible for 2022 early voting and allows for electioneering. It's accessible by public transportation and has adequate parking. It's adequate to handle estimated peak voting hours, and it is in an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. This is a photo of the outside. The social hall. And then the gym, which will be the general election. And then the next center is the Nancy Dasik Potomac Community Rec Center. It's another additional early voting center. It's accessible for 2022 early voting and allows for electioneering. It's accessible by public transportation, has adequate parking, and can handle peak voting hours. Is again in an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. outside. This is for the primary, general. And then the final center proposed is, it was actually used as an early, or let's say, it was approved to use as an early voting center. That's a typo. It was approved to use as a voting center in 2020. And is now being proposed to use as an early voting center for 2022. They will be using the social room instead of the gym, which is what we are asking the board to approve. So I'm gonna draw your attention to the social hall. And that wraps up Montgomery County.
So right now, we have 3 changes, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I in my mind, I thought we were gonna have 4. The 4th one, I guess, would be the additional site. We have White Oak, Nancy H. Dasick, and the Wheaton Library and Community Center.
Correct.
Okay, are there any questions from anyone on the board? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the 3 centers?
Move.
Fund has made a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, is there any opposition? Seeing none, all 3 centers are approved as presented.
Okay. We'll move on to Prince George's, which will have a total of 13 early voting centers. The only new center is the Rolling Crest Chillum Community Center. This was also used as a voting center in 2020. And with the addition of this early voting center, 99% of their registered voters will live within 5 miles of an early voting center. It serves areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. Their voter density, their diverse population, and their voter turnout. And this specific center would be an additional early voting center. It is ADA accessible for 2022 and allows for electioneering. There's public transportation and adequate parking. It is adequate to handle estimated peak voting hours and is located in an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. This is a photo of the front of the building. And then inside, the recommendation to approve.
So let me make sure I understand this properly. It's one site, and is it, how many sites do they have? Were they supposed to have 12 and they have 13, or is 13 what they were statutorily minimum?
It's their minimum. They're not having an additional early voting center, but their minimum was increased this year.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions about PG County? Is there a motion to approve the Rolling Crest Chillum Community Center?
So moved.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Any opposition to the Rolling Crest Chillum Community Center? Seeing none, approved as presented.
St. Mary's County is up next. They will have 3 early voting centers. They're adding 2 additional early voting centers. This is a situation where they're only required to have 2, but they've opted to have an additional early voting center. 96% of their registered voters will live within 10 miles of an early voting center, and their early voting centers serve areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. That's their voter density. Their diverse population. And their voter turnout. Mechanicsville Firehouse is an additional early voting center. It's ADA accessible, allows for electioneering, and is accessible by public transportation. They have adequate parking and can handle estimated peak hours of voting. And this particular center serves an area with below average voter turnout. That is the firehouse and the room that will be used for voting. And then the second new location is the Bay District Firehouse. Again, an additional early voting center. It's accessible and allows for electioneering, accessible by public transportation, has parking, and can handle estimated peak voting hours. And this center serves an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. It's a photo of the front and inside. And those are St. Mary's 2 new centers.
Are there any questions about the St. Mary's early voting sites? I have one. They are, St. Mary's has minimum 2. They have 3. Are we confident that St. Mary's, the local government and we know the local board is on board. Is the local government on board with the extra site?
My understanding is that they have already approved them. I probably want to confirm that and get back.
Yeah, are they on, are they happen to have their election director on the phone with us?
They should be on. David?
What's the name? I'm muting.
Wendy Atkins.
Oh, sorry.
I'm on the call.
Hi, Wendy.
Hello. Hi.
We're just confirming that you have an extra early voting site and that your local government has already approved that.
Yes, the county commissioners approved the 3rd additional site at their July 13th meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was our only questions. Thanks for what you do.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Wendy.
So is there any other questions? Is there a motion to approve the Mechanicsville Firehouse and the Bay District Firehouse by doing that, we're approving the 3rd site?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any opposition? Seeing none, both sites are approved.
Okay. I'm going to jump down. Forgive my very quick scrolling. All right. So I'm going to move to Wicomico. Wicomico is going to have a total of 2 early voting centers. The new early voting center is the Family Life and Cultural Center at First Baptist Church. With these 2 centers, they will serve almost 92% of their registered voters within 10 miles of an early voting center. And they also serve their areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents. There's a map with the 2 locations, the existing center and the new. Their voter density map. Their minority population map. And their voter turnout map. The Family Life and Cultural Center is a new center. They have only had one in the past. It is accessible for 2022 early voting and allows for electioneering. It is accessible by public transportation and has adequate parking and can handle estimated peak voting hours. It does also serve an area of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse residents.
Is there statutory number 2 or 1?
It is 2.
Okay. Are there any questions for Wicomico? Get a motion to approve the Family Life and Culture Center at First Baptist Church in Wicomico County.
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to the Family Life and Cultural Center in Wicomico County? Seeing none, approved unanimously.
Okay, then I'm gonna jump back to Washington County. And I'll get this started and then I will hand off to Barry. So this, Washington County is going to have 2 total early voting centers. They'll be adding 1 additional early voting center. They're required to have 2 under the law. The existing center is the County Board of Elections office, and the additional center is the Hagerstown Free Library in downtown. They serve 86.7% of voters within a 10-mile radius of one of the 2 centers, and the centers are located to serve areas of below average voter turnout and above average concentration of diverse groups. This is a map of the centers. That's the voter density. The diverse population. And then the voter turnout. With regard to the Washington County Free Library, it is an additional early voting center. As I mentioned, they only had 1 in the past. It is accessible for 2022 early voting. It allows for electioneering and has is accessible to public transportation. It has adequate parking and is estimated to handle peak voting hours. Also located in an area of below average voter turnout and above average diverse population. This particular, I'll show this first. That's the library. And the inside, and I'm sure Barry will speak more to the process, but with regard to Washington County, the LBE had presented to their board 3 early voting centers. They were going to use their optional third. The third was going to be in Smithsburg. The board approved the 3 locations, but the county council did not approve the 3rd location. So they have their 2 locations being the Free Library and the Board of Elections. If you guys, I don't know if you have questions for me, if you wanted me to get Barry on so that he could give you a little bit more detail about the process.
Well, I definitely, because we have 2 speakers from the public, I think it would be very good for us to hear from the LB. Correct.
Sure. David, can you unmute Barry Jackson?
And we also, in between Ms. Dorsey speaking, there's somebody is unmuted and there's a hum coming from, I don't know if others can hear that, but if you could check that, please, I appreciate it.
Can everyone hear me? Melissa, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear
Okay,
you.
Our director, Kay Rabusi, is also on the line, and we'd prefer that she go ahead and present. So is it possible to get her unmuted?
Hi, it's Kay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, hello. Yes, you're correct. With the changes, we were now required to have 2 early voting sites in Washington County. And we did ask for a 3rd one, basically because our registration is right at that 100,000 mark. And we felt if we didn't hit that, it would probably be a good idea to go ahead and request a 3rd early voting site in Smithsburg. And so that was presented to our board was in favor and voted in favor of that 3rd location. It went before our county commissioners in October, and they rejected that 3rd early voting site. So we are requesting our second site to be at the Washington County Free Library. We were interested in that location because it is in downtown Hagerstown. Everyone knows where the library is. If you say the Washington County Library, it's on the transportation route. It has a lovely 2,800 square foot room for us to use. Also, there is adequate parking. The library is going to let the gate up, so no one has to get their parking ticket validated or anything like that. There is a back entrance that will allow electioneering out in the back. The front is on Potomac Street, and we will, of course, set off the no electioneering zone there. But definitely there would be area for candidates and signs in the back where the parking lot is as far as that no electioneering zone. What else can I share with you? Another reason for the downtown location is that in the past, we've gotten calls from people who don't have a car. This location would allow people in downtown Hagerstown to walk to the early voting location. And so we were excited about that option also for the voters. Barry, did I miss anything?
Not yet.
Not yet. What else would you all like to know? We looked at various other places in the county. That was all part of the packet of information. And so we did not make this decision lightly. We looked at least 15 other places in the county. One other location in the city that we had looked at. And so most of the places were in the county. We tried some of the fire halls, but in Washington County, they like to have bingo. And so to give up the proceeds that they take in during bingo, that was not something that they wanted to do. Some of the other community centers, we felt the rooms were just too small to consider as our second early voting site. And so we really were looking for a facility that was well known, that you could walk to if you needed to, that had adequate parking, a large place for early voting to take place. And we feel that that is at the Washington County Free Library.
Okay. Does any board member have any initial questions? And I would ask after this, because there's going to be some public testimony, if you all would remain on the line with us so that if there's any follow-up questions that the board would have, they could come back to you with follow-up questions. But is there any initial questions for our representatives of the LBE in Washington County?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sure.
Is there a reason, or was there a public reason given why the recommendation for a third early voting center was rejected? And that was by the county council, am I correct?
That was by the county commissioners. I'll let Barry field that one.
Yes, the commissioner who made that motion to reject the third site said that he did not feel that the taxpayers of Washington County should have to pay for a third site if it's not required.
Was there another question? Was there ever any discussion about so there had been a third recommended site by the local board of election, is that correct? In the Smithburg area?
Yes.
Was there ever any discussion at the commissioner level about that site as a recommended site? Did it ever get to that level of discussion?
At the Smithburg site?
Correct.
No.
Okay.
Any other questions? I just have one question. What was I mean, I hear some great reasoning for the downtown Hagerstown site. Was there ever consideration of Smithburg being number 2 and the downtown Hagerstown being the extra site?
The Smithsburg Library is a smaller location. I think the square footage of the room in there is about 1,000 square feet. And we were already a little nervous about it being a third early voting site, but we felt like if we had the other 2, then pretty much that third site would be concentrated on that local area, that Smithsburg area. So we probably would be able to handle it. But even at that point, we were concerned that there would be lines outside trying to get into the room. So had it been a second early voting site, we believe it would be impossible to be a second early voting site.
Okay. Thank you. That's very important. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, what I'd like to do now, if you all would just remain available. Who is our first person speaking? I think we have 2 from the public that are commenting on the Washington County placement of early voting centers. Who would the first one be?
I believe, Mr. Chairman, it's, sorry, I've lost the name, Seth Wilson.
Seth Wilson, that's right.
Thank you.
So can we, and then maybe if somebody could be getting queued up, ready for the next person right behind him. But we could unmute Seth, and Seth, if you can hear me, both friends, if you can hear me, we're looking for 3 or 4 minutes of comments and then open it up for questions in the essence of time.
Okay, well, I'll assume that you all can hear me.
We can hear.
We'll go right through this as fast as I can. The early voting center that we've got in Washington County, just as a little background, was purpose built by the, wow, that is not the voting center, but that would have been a great location. So it's purpose built, checks all the boxes that the state has for early voting centers, cost us about $1.5 million. Before the law changed, we intended that voting center to serve the entire county. And we first used it in 2020, and it did service the entire county. Like I mentioned here, the turnout was 30% higher at the election. And at the early voting center, it was twice what it was in 2018. Now that's a presidential versus gubernatorial, of course. And the other interesting thing about our county, as I looked at while I was looking at those numbers, was that we're consistently in the bottom 2 or 3 counties in terms of turnout at our early voting center. I don't know why, because it is a super location for an early voting center. It's perfect, right? Our early voting center that we created is perfect in just about every way. Next slide, please. So I used the 5-mile radius. I'm sorry, yeah, I forgot. So next slide. I used the 5-mile radius circle just for clarity. So this is a 5-mile. Of course, Washington County needs 2 centers, and so it's actually a 10-mile circle, but I used the 5 one. This is the minority population map with my circle added. Next slide. This is the voter turnout map, again, with my circle added. And then finally, next slide, the density map with my 5-mile circle added to it. So I mentioned checking all the boxes. Next slide, please. The election law states a number of factors, and those are all listed there to the left that we heard a lot about today. The one thing that we haven't heard a lot about today is the factor that's required in law about ensuring equitable distribution of voting centers throughout the county. There's nothing in the SBE form that requires the local boards to justify that or explain it or take it into consideration at all. And I think that's part of the problem here, is that, you know, our local board is very, very tuned in to trying to find a site that will meet everything that they're being told by the SBE, you know, needs to be met for an early voting center. But that criteria just isn't there. Next slide, please. So as a result, I think that really equitable distribution in the county was not properly considered by our local board. They were super focused on all of the criteria that the state gives them, but that just wasn't one. I think we have implicit assumptions that the board was making, and certainly that I heard being discussed because I attended, I think, virtually all of the board meetings, the local board meetings where this was discussed, that you know, you don't really see reflected on the form. Like, for example, you know, sites were excluded if they couldn't handle both elections. And I mean, I agree in principle that that's, you know, that if we could have ideally the same site for both elections, that would be the way to do it. But when it comes to, you know, making a decision, if you can't have the ideal, but you can still satisfy all of the criteria, maybe you should consider that. Another suggestion that I made back whenever the county said they were having trouble was to consider adding space with a modular trailer to a site. And I thought it was interesting today that Calvert County is actually doing that. So, you know, the fact that we could erect a temporary facility or maybe supplement space with a temporary facility, I think opens up a lot of additional possibilities that were never considered. Like I said, the early voting center that we've got checks all of the boxes and as previously serves the entire county itself. So really, when it comes to all of the criteria that the state board has listed, our early voting center satisfies everything. All right. And this last one, I'm sorry, I did creep in an opinion here. I think really our local board was overly enamored of the library as a second site because they were approached by the library, and that never happens. And, you know, inside the room is spacious and great, but it is in a corner of the library. And, you know, there are some question marks about the library site, but, you know, so I think it was never really a question of where is the second site going to go in the county. It was always just where are we going to put the third. So, but that is an opinion. So, and as an example of that, next slide, please. And I said assistant director, it's deputy director. Sorry about that, Barry. But when Director Jackson was speaking to the board of county commissioners, you can read the statement here, but the part that I thought was important to point out was he said that there was no way, even if they had a facility, that they could have put one out there in Hancock because of the requirements we have. And the other thing that he told the commissioners was that the early voting centers have to be within 5 miles of 80% of the voting population. So again, you know, Washington County is required to have 2. And because Washington County is required to have 2, it's actually the 10-mile standard that applies. And that is only 50% of the voters, right? Now, I think you can see that our early voting center, even within 5 miles, you know, again, checks all of the boxes. All right. But the point is that, you know, this statement here, and it's not, and I don't mean just to single him out. I mean, this is really what I heard at the board, right? And so this was everybody. And they just weren't considering any place, you know, outside of basically downtown. So that's, I just want to point, I mean, that it really, I don't think it has been given proper consideration at all. So next slide. So what we wound up with then is this, right? We have 2 voting centers basically in downtown Hagerstown, basically on top of each other. I mean, even if the library were a perfect site, which it is not, but even if it were a perfect site, it's redundant. We don't need it. We have the perfect site at our early voting center. It covers all of the same territory. So we, you know, that I think really was the sense of the county commissioners when they were looking at how, you know, this was decided. And I want you to keep in mind, if you would, I mean, I just saw it for the first time today, but think about the maps that they had in Calvert County, again, where they've got that one modular facility, and then in St. Mary's County, and think about the distribution those counties have versus what we're seeing here in Washington County. So next slide, please. And so, another thing that the next map shows when it pops up there, this is the low turnout. The previous one was the voter density, but this is the low turnout. And again, our election center that we have is servicing all of the downtown areas of low voter turnout. It's not servicing really those other more remote areas in the county. I mentioned Hancock. For those of you who haven't been to our beautiful county, Hancock is out in the far western part of the county there. That far western precinct, right about where that precinct number is, maybe a little bit to the west of that. So that's where Hancock is. And you look at this wide swath of territory where we have people not voting, and there's nothing out there. So I'll mention that. And then next slide, please. And so then the board did come to the county commissioners and ask that they consider the Smithsburg Library as a third voting site, but they also very specifically sought to remove any possible consideration from our county commissioners of having the Smithsburg site be the second site, and then choosing whether or not to have the library as the third site. They put very specific language in their approval to make sure that the commissioners only had a choice about adding a third site or not. And the commissioners were pretty upset that they weren't really consulted about where these voting centers were going, and that that decision had been reached. And I do think it's fair to say that the motion that was made at the commissioners was, it's simply like, we don't need to be spending more money on a third voting center. And so they put that, they said no. Although I believe in the commissioners meeting, there was some expression of support for either additional voting centers, and I think possibly a voting center in Smithsburg. I believe one of the commissioners commented he had no objection to a voting center in Smithsburg. But and I can say privately, which isn't maybe fair, but privately I've had discussions with commissioners, and we think maybe we might even, or they think, right? Not we, but they think that there might even be a call to have Washington County have four: one in west, one in south, and one in east. But of course we can't do that because of the way the law is written. But so it's not necessarily, I don't believe that the commissioners are opposed to additional sites.
So we're running out of time. Just we're at about 10 minutes right now. So we're
okay. So
we'll get to your recommendations, and then we can ask you questions.
Okay. All right. So if we could advance to the next to the last slide, if I could just have one comment, because it was something that was said earlier. Again, advance. That's the Smithsburg site. This is what you're looking at whenever you're saying, that shaded area there in the middle is basically the people that it would make more sense for them to go to the early voting center that's been proposed versus Smithsburg. And that's the difference of having a second site at Smithsburg versus downtown, right? So I just want to point that out. And so my recommendations, the last slide. I would ask the board to consider either rejecting outright the early voting center at the downtown library, or to postpone its approval. And I would ask the board to require our local board to submit a proposal for an early voting site that does take into account the factor of equitable distribution of early voting centers in the county. I would also ask the board to consider in the future adopting a regulation that takes the equitable distribution into account, and then update COMAR so that it does show up on the board's early voting center proposal form. And I would also like the submissions that the local board makes for the early voting center proposals to be published for public review and comment. And I have some examples here of things that I believe I saw when I did get the election board to send me those forms, which they did promptly. I'll publicly thank the election board. They responded promptly to my requests. So I thank them for that. And, but there are some problems in those forms that I think would have been better for us to see early on. That's it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went long.
So is there any questions for Mr. Wilson? Seeing no questions, we can move on to our other presenter. We have gentleman unmuted.
Is it Peter, right?
Correct.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Mr. Chairman, members of the State Board of Elections, thank you for the opportunity to speak for a few minutes. I'll be brief. Quick introduction. My name is Peter E. Perini Sr. I live in Washington County, Maryland. I'm currently the Vice Chair of the Washington County Democratic Central Committee in this cycle 2018-2022. Previously the Chairman in the previous cycle 2014-2018, and prior to that a member. Since 2014, I've also served on the Executive Committee of the Maryland Democratic State Central Committee, also known as the Executive Committee of the Maryland Democratic Party. I give those credentials to explain why I'm familiar with this process, and I'll come to that in a minute. But despite my credentials, my comments today are not partisan and are my own comments and beliefs. Since 2014, I have been a regular attendee of just about every meeting of the local Board of Elections in Washington County. And even though there's been some turnover on both the staff and the appointed board, everyone, and I'll underscore, everyone at the Washington County Board of Elections has always acted with the utmost integrity and in a nonpartisan manner. And I want to thank them publicly for that. The local Board of Elections in Washington County started considering early voting sites almost as soon as this law was introduced as a bill earlier this year. As I said, I've attended almost every meeting. They evaluated more than a dozen sites, reviewing the pros and cons of each. They also spent a significant amount of time reviewing the new law and the locations requirements therein. Based on my hearing of the discussions at the board meetings, I believe that the Washington County Board of Elections has made the correct determination by selecting the downtown library as the second early voting site in Washington County. I wasn't going to add this, but I think Mr. Jackson is probably too polite to say. One of the reasons that the county commissioners refused to consider the third, or what I refer to in my own vernacular, the +1 early voting site in Smithsburg, was that a number of constituents, I believe, led by Mr. Wilson, who is currently the chair of the Washington County Republican Central Committee, ginned them up pretty good and got them pretty upset about choosing a downtown Hagerstown location. They weren't going to accept any location that they had to approve because they were not at all happy. It was because of that, in my opinion, because of those interactions. I wish we had the third site approved in Smithsburg as the +1, because everything that we tried to do, and I believe that the local Board of Elections tries to do, is to engage more voters in the election process in Maryland. So in conclusion, I would urge the State Board of Elections to approve the proposed site as presented by your staff. Thank you for your time. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for the speaker? So I appreciate your time, both of your time, in being involved in the process, and we want to definitely both have presented reasonable defenses of what you believe the way through is, and it'll all be taken into consideration. And I, again, thank you for your testimony from both of you. Just any last minute questions from anybody in the board or either of the speakers or for the LBE?
The question, Mr. I'm not sure who it should be directed to, maybe the board staff first, about the COMA regulation and timing. This probably predates my tenure on the board, about the issue the first speaker raised, where the COMAR standards don't match the standards set forth in the election law article. I guess, so the question is that because of the timing, or the regulations weren't updated after the General Assembly passed legislation last session?
I don't believe so. I think I believe that I believe that I would let somebody from our SBE staff maybe chime in on that, but I believe that it would be the belief of the SBE staff that the form does consider that as it looks at population and distribution. And I don't know if anybody from the SBE staff wants to speak on to that form or the idea.
So you all, I believe it was the October meeting, approved proposed regulations that bring our regulations into compliance with the state law. So our form was state law, and the regulations are in the process of moving through that publication, comment, and back to you. So they will align, but the form and the process that we presented today align with the newly passed law from 2021.
Does it answer your question, Mr. Williams?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions, or would anyone on the board like to speak to any issue about with Washington County and the two proposed sites?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
While I was listening to the two speakers and looking closely at the Washington County recommendation, I went back through because I was curious in all of our other counties that we were considering these early voting locations and how closely together from a geographic standpoint and the sharing of even zip codes. And other than, and I didn't take a close look, but I did an overview, and certainly Montgomery County has early voting centers with duplicate zip codes. I think that's to be expected given the population density and the geographic nature of Montgomery County. But in all of the other counties that we were considering today, if you go back and you look at the maps, there does not appear to be, and I will stand corrected if I'm wrong from my review, but there does not appear to be another county in which there are two early voting centers, where the only two early voting centers would share a zip code. But that is the case for Washington County if this particular plan is approved for Washington County. So I personally, in looking at this, it does concern me that the two early voting centers for Washington County share a zip code, and certainly the visual representation of these maps. It's quite obvious that the two early voting centers for Washington County would be quite geographically close. So I just make those comments because it seems to be a little close for two early voting centers geographically. So we haven't taken a vote yet, but I am, I'm leaning towards that there should be a further review of Washington County by the local board of election and the consideration of equitable distribution or something that would at least take a look at this. And I realize we cannot dictate what would occur here. I fully respect that. But I personally have concerns when the two early voting centers are that geographically close and share a zip code, unlike Montgomery County, where you're going to have overlapping zip codes in light of population. So those are my observations. Again, from going back and looking at all of the other maps that we were presented with today, this is the only map that would have that level of overlap with the second center.
Thank you very much.
Do you mind if I give just a little bit of context there? I've become intimately familiar with the maps. So Wicomico actually has a relatively similar situation where both are in Salisbury. And just going through the centers and evaluating them and comparing them to counties that have more dispersed populations like St. Mary's and Calvert and things of that nature. The things that were unique about Wicomico and Washington is that their population density and some of the other considerations in the regs are all centered in those locations, in those very like urban city locations. Whereas if you look at a county like St. Mary's or Calvert, there are a couple different areas throughout the county of more dense voters or minority populations that drove the considerations to approving the centers that are kind of more dispersed throughout the county. Just Washington and Wicomico were slightly unique in that nature. So I just wanted to kind of give that context also.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else have any feelings? Like to share?
Question, and also I guess for
Yeah.
our staff first. Can you remind me or the order of events that occurred here? So it had to get Washington County Commissioner approval because they were proposing a third site, and that third site over and above what is mandated requires them first to get the approval from the governing body of the county.
Correct. So the new law took them from 1 to 2, and the law considers that third site. But first, you have to have both the LBE and the local board agree, and then send that to the SBE for consideration. And when Washington County did that for this third site, the Smithburg Library, it was turned down by the county commissioners.
So I guess the question before then too is if there were only 2 proposed, they would not need the governing body's approval. Is that accurate?
Correct. Without that governing body's approval, they are their 2 statutory sites.
And so what occurred here is they proposed that third site. The governing body said no, and so now procedurally it came to us to approve the 2 that are required by the first part of the statute based on population.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Furman.
a question. The local board and the governing bodies have presented us with 2 sites for approval. I take it that they're citizens or someone else that wants a third site. What authority do we have to impose a third site if the local board and the governing bodies have approved 2 and they're really not required to have this third site?
I think that would be, I'm going to say what I believe, and then I'm going to let Mr. Trento answer that. But I believe what Mr. Trento is going to say is that because of the order, that it would have to originate with the LBE, who would then have to have buy-in from the local municipality, who would then present it to the state board. So I don't believe that the state board has oversight to force a third site. Is that incorrect, Mr. Trento?
No, that's correct. I think what happened at the county level, I think, is a little confusing. But what's before the board right now is the vote to approve the new site as the second site that's being proposed by the local board of elections for Washington County. And the second site is one that Mr. Wilson is asking the board to either postpone approval of or to reject, because in his view, it does not meet the requirements set forth under 10301.1, or all of the requirements, including the requirement that second site ensure equitable distribution of early voting centers throughout the county. I think that, and all of the sites, then in this case, the new site is subject to approval by the State Board of Elections. So we're not in the category of the State Board approving the extra site or the +1 site after the local governing body and the local Board of Elections have agreed to add that. The board is approving the site as the second statutorily required site in its capacity of approving all early voting sites. So I hope that clarifies things.
Yes, it does. That's why I was raising a question, so that we get clarification of what we could or couldn't do, or what we are required to do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fun. Any other questions or comments? I'll throw in, a couple comments. First of all, I hear what the board is saying with, I heard a couple things that they're very near the number where 3 sites would be mandated, but they're not quite there. So I hear the desire in the board for that third site and the staff for that third site. I also hear that site 2 is not a good option. Site 3 is not a good option to be site 2 because of its size. But it was adequate, but they still had some concerns about it being the third site, but there was more concerns about it being site 2. What I had heard, and we can certainly ask the staff, is that if let's say the other library was not available in Hagerstown, that they would still not have gone to the Smithsburg location as site 2. Does that sound correct, Melissa? Is that an accurate statement? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, they did not believe that the Smithsburg Library could suffice as a site 2.
Yeah. And I will also add that the local board is that approved it is a bipartisan team. So, I think this is a nonpartisan issue. This is I see it very practical. I also see exactly what Mrs. Woodward brought up, and that we almost have these concentric circles when we really would like to see better distribution. So, but then I heard that there was 12 sites considered. So, from my standpoint, I can't see a reason to overrule the local board. Just speaking from my singular vote, although my preference would be to have that second site somewhere else. I don't see the reason to overrule the board in this matter personally. I wonder if they could go back to the county to try to get a third site and make everybody happy. But those are my comments. Are there any other comments before we look to either vote or, and quite frankly, we can kind of poll this a little bit if we don't have, we need 4 votes for everything out of 5. So if we have 2 people that are uncomfortable with the current map as presented with this other unit, we can we can push it back because we could know we wouldn't have the votes. Are there any other comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman, you said we could push it back. Okay, if it was pushed back, what would be the alternatives?
I don't know. And that's one of the reasons why. Do we want to, do you want to ask that question to the LBE?
Yes. Well, I mean, where would,
because that was actually my concern, is that if they've already looked at 12 sites and didn't find any of them adequate, it may be that this is the best option, and that's how this local board found the facts before them. Can we maybe have Mr. Fund's question addressed to the LBE directly? Are they still on the line with us?
David, are you able to get Kay? If not, I might be able to give a bit of insight into that.
Yeah. Hi, it's Kay again. I've understood your question. You're asking what alternatives do we have at this point of the locations that we looked at? I'll be honest, when we had these new considerations to consider, the one that I thought, of those new ones as far as dense population, near transportation, to historically disenfranchised communities, even if for me, if the Washington County Library is out of the picture, I feel like with those considerations, population, disenfranchised, minority groups, it would still should be a place downtown Hagerstown. And I'm sorry, that's just how I see it. We even went to the point to contact Senator Quarterman about the new stadium that's coming to Hagerstown, because we thought that would be an ideal early voting location. And so when I saw these new considerations, I just thought there had to be one downtown Hagerstown to meet some of the needs of the people who live there, who maybe don't have a vehicle and could walk to an early voting site. They cannot walk out to the Virginia Avenue location. Is there a county commuter? Yes. But are we talking about people that maybe can't afford to ride the county commuter? And so for me, I really thought the library was going to be a perfect location. And that's me talking. And so when you ask where else could we go, I think I'm hearing this whole equitable distribution concern, but then part of me thinks, what about the dense population? What about the disenfranchised people? And so I have a hard time knowing which of those considerations is supposed to be looked at, I don't know, more than the others. And so, so with all that being said, the places that we looked at and cannot use, I said some of the volunteer fire companies, we looked at the Smithsburg Library, Fire Hall. They're either not accessible, they're not large enough. We looked at the municipal community centers in Keedysville, Binsbar, because that would take us further south and out in the county. They're not served by public transportation. They also are not the locations for these large populations or dense populations or minority voters. And so that's where I'm coming from. I don't know that that answered your question, but that's what we took into consideration when looking at the places, what would meet these considerations. And that's why we came up with the Washington County Library.
Thank you.
May-
Appreciate your
Oh,
response.
well, I guess, can I jump on just a question that I thought you were getting at, Malcolm, the question of, I guess, is there time to even select an alternative site if we were to reject it in advance of the primary election?
Good question.
Yeah, if you know, I'm sorry, I forget the speaker's name already. Kay?
It's Kay. All I know is this is probably a question for the state. I mean, we had to have our paperwork in end of November. We had started this project with the library in July, and I would like to correct something that Mr. Wilson said. They did not reach out to us. I contacted the library. Okay, so that is what happened. I contacted the library July 26th. They were very happy to do to serve as an early voting site. But anyway, I don't know at this point, because we're talking about having to find a place that is available for early voting, has sufficient parking, has a room large enough, and well, you know, all those considerations that go along with it. So right now, I don't know. We had looked at or contacted the Public Safety Center that's being built out on Sharpsburg Pike, but they're not opening until spring, so I don't know if that would be an option or not with that facility.
Thank you. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other board members with comments, thoughts?
I guess my comment, I echo yours, Mr. Chair, your inclination that there's not much to disturb the request before us. I agree, visually looking at the map, the circles are concentric, but as I'm sorry, I forget Kay's last name, but as Kay mentioned, like, I think the density here, I'm looking at the numbers from the slide, that 80 something percent, 89% of the voters would be within the, sorry, 86.7% of the voters would be within 10 miles of the center. I guess, so to, I guess, take that competing interest makes sense to me. And it seems, I guess my question was getting at, is there enough time if the LBE and other people wanted to select a third site to go back and start that process anew? But that's like sort of not, in my view, before us today. That's for them to try to sort out.
I mean, and certainly what you heard from the director there was that the inclination would be to go, still stay in Hagerstown, which is still in, to Ms. Woodward's point, the same zip code. So, there's just such a density, I think, in that county, that in that Hagerstown area. I mean, when you think about it, those two still, that's covering what, 80, was it 87%?
86.7 based on the slide.
Yeah, that's a lot of the population. And I can also see the desire to have the third center. So, any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, just as a point, I agree with both what you said and what Mr. Williams said. And I would agree with Sky too. This is not an optimal solution. This is not picture perfect and just the way you want it to be. The Venn diagram is basically one circle, but I don't know that there's a solution to that that is achievable, and certainly not achievable in the time needed to get everything in an orderly process so that everything that has to happen next year can actually happen on time.
Okay. Is there any other comments? I don't want to try to ram through to go to a vote until everybody, I know everybody's heard. So then what's under consideration is, I believe it's just the addition of one site at the library is what we are considering. So is there a motion to accept the library in Hagerstown? Let me get the right word. Is it called the Hagerstown Library? I'm already.
Hagerstown Free Library.
Hagerstown Free Library as the second early voting site for Washington County. Is there such a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fun has made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Okay. So we should take a vote on this because there was some dissension. So all those in favor of approving the Hagerstown Free Library as the second early voting site for Washington County, signify by raising your hand. So it is unanimous. But no one's super happy about it. So, okay. Is that?
I guess to make a comment too, I guess, based on everybody's names. Mr. Wilson's, one of his recommendations was about the publishing of submissions. I guess that would be, goes to the governing body first, or does it not? I guess. I do like the idea of having things publicly available, and I'm, I guess, thinking about how to operationalize that if it's not available easily for the public to review and comment on.
So under current law, there's already a requirement for the local and the state board to publish notice of actions that will impact a voter's ability to vote. So this is certainly one of those. And so Kay can talk to you about their public notice. For example, Donna posted the public notice for this meeting because you all were considering early voting. So there is already a requirement for public notice for when there's contemplating board action that would impact voting rights. It's not the exact phrase, but it's pretty close.
Right. I guess is the form, for example, available online.
We've given a template for what the text of the notice is, and they're supposed to post it on the website as well as wherever they provide meeting notice. So on their front door or wherever they would normally post notice of a meeting, they also need to post notice of potential action.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm getting at it. We don't have to go into it now, but I guess it would be nice if it's feasible to have things like the form PDF presented by the LBE available as part of the public notice process. But we can go into that or discuss that in the future.
Okay. So are we through the current batch?
Yes, that was all of them. I need to circle back with you just to make sure that there were no additionals in that first batch, which I will next meeting when I present to you Anne Arundel. That's the only remaining county.
And if it's an additional that we voted anyway for the site, we're fine. It's just if there was an additional that was already, well, we need to just give them their information based on the law.
I'll make sure, I'll just get a list together of all of the counties that have used their additional that weren't approved today.
Great. Thank you very much. You're very kind and appreciate your work on that.
Sure thing.
So we can check number 9 off and we move to old business. And I believe in old business, we have the Mayo consideration. Is there any other old business or is that the only old business we have? Does anybody know of any other old business? Okay. So I think somebody from the staff is going to have to tell us again what the recommendation is exactly and what Mayo's asked for.
Yeah, so Charmaine Malcolm, our Director of HR, is on the line to provide you with just that, what the Mayo recommendation, what the Mayo request was, and what the state administrator's recommendation. So David, if you could unmute Charmaine, that'd be great. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and board members. To summarize Mayo's salary proposal that was presented during our last board meeting, Mayo is requesting a 2-grade increase for the election directors and deputies, which includes moving the salary bands up 2 grades as well. They're also requesting a 12% salary increase for the directors and deputies. The requested effective date is July 1st, 2021. Linda's recommendation is a 1-grade 6% salary increase, including moving the salary band up 1 grade for the election directors and deputies, effective January 1st, 2022.
Why did I feel like there was 2 parts to this, and part of it was a grade and part of it was a step? Am I missing? Did I just not remember something correctly?
Yes, so the request is to increase the deputies and directors by 2 grades, which equals a 12% salary increase.
Okay.
And also move the bands up 2 grades as well.
Okay, so it's 2 things. It's both a band and a grade?
Correct.
Okay. Because in their letter, I still see request 1 and request 2. Did you just put that into one? I'm just trying to understand what they were asking for again. So salary band adjustment by 2 grades, I see that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says salary adjustment for current directors and deputy directors. Was that separate?
That's separate. That's the 12%. Yes, that's the 12% increase that I mentioned earlier.
Okay, so those are 2 different things. The 2-grade increase and the 12% are 2 different things.
Correct.
And then the recommendation from the executive director, from the state director, is a 1-grade increase. Was there anything? That's just the recommendation, not the salary increase as well? Is that correct?
It's a 1-grade 6% salary increase.
1-grade 6%. Great. Okay. Any questions from the board?
If I can just also point out that Charmaine explained the 2 different effective dates.
Yeah, and the 2 different effects. July 1st versus January 1st, 2022.
Correct.
Okay, any questions from the board? Did anyone on the board have any questions for, I'm sure there's somebody here from Mayo, if you would have any questions for them or for the director?
I'm sorry if I missed it. Wasn't there a question too we had about the authority to deviate from the recommendation?
We have the ability to do that. Insofar it is we believe it's in the best interest of the state. Did I summarize that in one sentence, Mr. Trento? Or would you like to summarize that differently?
Well, as you know, it was the subject of legal advice. If you want more information about the advice, I'm happy to give it in closed session. Broadly speaking, the board does have the authority to determine the rate of fixed compensation of local board employees. Obviously, the board has duties to the state's duties to the board, and is well equipped to rely on the expertise of the staff in discharging its duty to determine the fixed compensation of local board employees. And so, but in terms of just statutory authority, it's there for the board to deviate from the state administrator's recommendation.
Any discussion, thoughts? Concerns, questions? So we have a request from Mayo, who we've heard from in the past, and then we have the recommendation from the administrator, from the state administrator. Are there any questions for either or comments?
I'm trying to find the statute at issue here, but it's while I'm trying to pull it up, because my initial comment is I'm inclined to side with the administrator's recommendation in the absence of kind of real standards or guidance in the statute, or I guess in regulations about how we should decide these matters. And I guess I found her reasoning compelling about the disparity in the I guess pay, and she has to keep that in consideration statewide, I guess. And I guess I'm frustrated, or I lack the experience here, but I guess think that might be maybe a thing for legislature to tinker with, or figure out how all the employees that oversee elections can be on similar standing. But I guess that's where I am now, but I'm still open to hearing people's thoughts and discussion. And thoughts to the contrary.
Anyone else? I mean, I can tell you, I have a genuine concern about, and I think that about compensation for those in the election, professional election officials, because I think that the competition nowadays is coming from everywhere, and the loss of subject matter experts in the field is unbelievably draining, and in an area where you need to be on your game. So I am in general, I hate spending money, but I am in general in support of paying what we can that's reasonable. I think that is in the best interest of the citizens in Maryland to be able to hold good elections and not lose our election officials to, another industry or another profession, especially with rising minimum wages and all these inflation pressures that of late, I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you can have, pay people low wages and raise everything else up. So I'm in general in support. I understand the tension with all the things at play here. But I am, I will move with the direction that I feel the rest of the board is moving, so that we can get, a pay increase to our directors and deputy directors. But so I'd like to hear what others feel or think.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with everything you said. My only concern about it is we don't really have any analysis suggesting what we would do if we were going to modify the administrator's recommendation and what the basis for that is. We haven't studied the effect of inflation on jobs such as this. The market for these services or these kinds of skills, we don't really know what that is. We're all sort of flying by the seat of our pants. And to a certain extent, even the recommendation by the administrator is in some ways arbitrary. And all respect to you, but I think her effort to try and keep salaries in line is commendable. That compare apples to apples and have the same kinds of guidelines apply across the board is commendable. But absent some kind of a highfalutin study that says here's the economic impact of inflation and recession and these sort of things, I think we're kind of throwing a dart at a dartboard. So for that reason, I would be more inclined to go with the administrator's recommendation than to pull something out of a hat.
Although I don't think we had, robust studies. We did have Mayo's, not only their new letter, but the one prior to that, which explained their rationale for the two-step increase. I'm not saying yes or no to the credibility of it, but it had, there was some rationale, though I hear you loud and clear. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I think we have to be guided by where our duties as members of the state board lie. We have a fiduciary duty to the State Board of Election. And in her role as the administrator of the state board, we receive recommendations on any number of issues. And this is one of them. It's clearly one of the more important ones. We are, salary transcends all kinds of things, not the least of which is morale and quality of life. We all understand that. But in light of the administrator's experience and having done this many, many times, and the work that's been done over the years to improve the salary situation at the local boards, I am inclined and would vote in favor of the recommendation that Ms. Lamone has given to us for this particular round of salary increases. I'll say that and I think I've said this on a couple of our meetings so far, I know that this comes from legislation, but it still seems odd to me that we are in a position as a board to have this vote. I just put that out there because I just find it somewhat strange that the board would be weighing in at such a level and voting on salaries. And because it seems to me as if it would be something that the state administrator would have within her purview without subject to board voting, but it is what it is. There's laws in place and we're doing what we're supposed to do to have these votes. And like I said, my vote would be to support the recommendation of the administrator at this time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to weigh in? Okay. Oh, you're muted, Mr. Williams. Are you trying to?
Thank you. I was saying I would second Ms. Woodward's observation that this feels unusual or abnormal to be in this position to vote on this. And I guess if I could start from scratch, at least it would be, I think, more ideal to have salary based on performance or merit and not just fixed rate across the state. And people have worked very hard, especially over the past year and a half, 2 years of COVID. And I think should be rewarded, but I guess it's also, ideally, there'd be a little more flexibility, but I know that raises issues as well. But yeah, like she said, I guess ultimately where we are, given our position as board members in the state with our duties to the state board, I'm inclined to keep my vote, like I said, with Ms. Lamone's recommendation.
Okay. Unless I hear something to the contrary, like I said, I'm happy to go with the direction where the board is going on this. So is there somebody who would like to make a motion to accept the recommendation of the state administrator as to the salary adjustments?
Mr. Chairman, I so move that we approve the recommendation of the administrator.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. So unanimously approved. Okay. No other old business. Is there any new business? Disclosure of campaign contributions. Anybody have any campaign contributions to disclose? Is a going to a Lincoln Reagan dinner a campaign contribution? In the essence of maybe that
Yes.
it is.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I went to the Anne Arundel County Lincoln Reagan dinner, and I guess my portion was $100. My wife's was $100, so my reporting is $100.
Question while on that topic too, I guess, because I was asked by a law school classmate to donate to a PAC, but in a different state actually. And so do we have to disclose? I did not donate to that until I asked, so I didn't know if there's, if we have any guidance on that. We can talk offline also. If we need to disclose any sort of political donations, even outside of the state of Maryland.
I know that in the past, there have been disclosures as to federal races. I mean, that's certainly outside the state of Maryland, even if it impacts the state of Maryland. You know, the presidential candidates, for instance. But obviously, we're all, residents of Maryland are voting for those candidates. So
right.
I can get back to you on that, Justin.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? So our next scheduled meeting date. I know that I would have a problem with the January date, on the normal date in January. What does that look like for others?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
right now, I don't see it as a problem, but I know the day before I have an appointment, and depending upon what transpires from that appointment, but I don't see any difficulty in making the 20th.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? So if we keep it on the 20th, the most we will have is 4. If Mr. Fun had an issue on the 19th, then we would not have quorum. So my recommendation would be potentially to move that, to remove the risk. Is everybody okay with that? How long are you away? What should we stay away from, Scott, in that period of time?
Was that question to me, Mr. Chairman? I'm actually gone the entire month of January. And it's just that happens that the day that on the 20th is a day that, in light of where I'm going to be, I would not be able to participate. If we were to move it to the next week or even the prior week, based upon where I'm going, I'm gonna be in the South Pacific. I'm gonna be in French Polynesia, and I will be on a cruise ship. We'll have satellite. I might be able to participate, but I can't make a firm commitment. I just know that certainly the day of the 20th is a day that I would not be able, because I will have other activities happening that day. So I will truly do the best that I can. If it's the week prior on the 13th, looks like it would be potentially a doable day, or a week later on the 27th could be a doable day. My time difference, I think, is 5 hours, 6 hours earlier in the morning. I don't mind participating early in the morning, but I can't vouch for my technology. That's all.
Yeah. So what do y'all think? Do you want to move it either to the 13th or the 27th? The 13th might be, there might not be enough. It's, with the holidays and everything, there might not be much to meet about. Would we be wise anyway with the holidays and everything to move it to the 27th? How does the staff feel about it?
Mr. Chairman, the 27th would be better for me. The 13th, I have a conference call scheduled in the middle of the afternoon.
Okay. So we move, does everybody okay then with moving the meeting to January 27th? Does that work better for everyone?
27th will work for me.
Okay,
And me.
okay, great. Is that okay for the staff? Are we okay there, Nikki? 27?
Thank you.
Okay, so that is done. January's meeting moved to the 27th. Okay. Now, we don't have any other business to conduct inside of this this open meeting. So we will not be coming back into the closed meeting to adjourn. So when we vote to move to the closed meeting, we're going to move into the closed meeting. We're not going to come back in just to then close the meeting. So letting you know that this will end the meeting. So the board will now consider whether to meet in closed session to discuss the compensation of employees over whom the board has salary setting authority. It's permitted under section 305B1 of the general provision article. This exemption applies to a discussion among the members of the board regarding a personnel matter that affects a specific individual. Meeting in closed session would allow the members of the board to be briefed on personnel matters and share their views without compromising the confidentiality of those discussions. May I have a motion to meet in closed session?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, hold your hand up. Signify by raising your hand. So the motion having passed, the board will now meet in closed session in accordance with exemption B1 of section 3-305 of the Open Meetings Act. And again, we will not be coming back into this meeting. And it is now 5 o'clock on the nose. How about 10 minutes after 5? Is that good for everybody? We'll meet in closed session at 5:10. Okay? Thank you.
Okay.